I want to get back to politics now because there's just talk at the moment, and it's just talk, but momentum might be building among disaffected small L Liberals and Teals for a new centre-right movement. Let's go now live to the Australian Financial Review political editor, Phil Coorey, who wrote about this today. Phil, great to see you. You emphasise in the first couple of parts that this is just talk, but we know where talk can lead, and they're, serious conversations, and there's a lot of concern about this existential crisis that the Liberal Party's in.
Yeah, it's a difficult sort of story to write, Laura, because everything's happening but nothing's sort of happening. But it's ever since the election where the Liberal Party, was touted quite badly, and for the second election in a row, and we've seen the diminishing of moderates in the party because of the Climate 200 and the Teal movement. And so the policy agenda has become more conservative. And I think when the decision was made to abandon net zero a few weeks ago, that basically spelt the end of any significant moderate influence on policy making, and sparked all that sort of panic or alarm, if you like, that they were never going to win back the seats they needed to win back to have a formed government again. So there's been a lot of chit-chat, or it's more than chit-chat, like sort of active discussions, pub discussions, what if we did that? What if you sort of merge with the Teals, this disgruntled progressives? And it's just continues to grow, but it's still, no one's sort of in charge of it. There's no structure around it. There's not even a firm timetable or anything, but it's everywhere, and it's everywhere, and it's not so much in the sort of the few surviving moderates in the Liberal Party in Canberra. They're the people like Andrew Bragg and Tim Wilson. They're all about trying to fix the Liberal Party rather than start another movement. Yeah. But it's coming a lot out of the Teals and sort of former Liberals, and the sort of the Malcolm Turnbull types and people like that. It's happening in South Australia. Cathy McGowan's involved, the woman who started the Community Independence, and I think what they're worried about is that if the Liberal Party is never going to be able to form government again, or in the foreseeable future, we're going to have this, what James Patterson called recently the Victorianisation of Australia, where you just have a one-party state. And we see it in Victoria now, we see it in Western Australia, the ACT and South Australia. They're expecting a Liberal wipeout over there in March. And you can see how Anthony Albanese federally is sort of empire building, if you like, Laura, about talking about building on the 94 seats, and he's now visiting such seats as Forest in Western Australia with his eyes on pinching those. And there's sort of people worried about we just don't have an opposition anymore, an effective opposition. Now, it may be a bit alarmist. Susan Lee's doing her level best. The government's got a lot of problems with energy prices and inflation, and maybe this will all fizzle on the other side of summer. But certainly no one on that sort of old centre-right progressive side of things can see a way back to government for the Liberal Party.
Not at all, or just in the near term.
That's right. And the polls sort of... Well, you can see everything they're doing so far is really about one nation. You will have the immigration policy out next week. We've had the net zero policy a few weeks ago, and this is all driven by pressure for one nation. The Liberal vote is just hemorrhaging towards one nation quite spectacularly. Yeah. And so it's sort of like a two-step thing. Try and sort of marginalise one nation and shut them out, then go back after Labor. But it's just, I don't know where it's going to go. Laura, may not go anywhere. But it's just interesting that it's at this level. The talk is at this level. We haven't seen this sort of thing in the Liberal Party for many years. I mean, I'm not quite that old, but in my home state in South Australia, the Liberals split in the early 70s. Yep. The moderates and the Conservatives went their own way, and that they rejoined, but the remnants of that moderate split went on to sort of form part of the Australian Democrats. And the Australian Democrats are really a bit like the Teals. They're just a disgruntled moderate Liberal movement.
Still fighting about it in South Australia too, really. You see those effects today. I would say at this point in the electoral cycle, nothing's ever as good as it seems for Anthony Albanese, nothing's ever as bad as it seems for the Liberals. But 100%. You're right, things do change. We're at this point. You've got to take note of the polling. But as you said, everything's about, staving off one nation. So they're just trying to survive at the moment. They're not trying to win. So this is, a couple of term strategy anyway. And Phil, it seems to me that they've got a massive structural problem, the Liberal Party, where all those Teal seats were won. Those Teal seats are where the massive donor base comes from for the Liberal Party. So that's been fractured. You've got these ageing branches, I would describe them as, where you've got people who have time, often retirees, to go to these branch meetings. They get their members up in electorates where it doesn't actually represent, a winning strategy. The base of the party is changing. Not changing where the electorate is, and it's becoming more moderate. So these are existential problems for them.
Well, it's not only that, Laura, too. They're in such a poor state in some of the states, like Victoria, South Australia, WA.
You mean structurally, Phil?
Well, yeah, but that affects you though. If you're not in, I go back to 2007 when Kevin Rudd won, and when he won, every state and the Commonwealth was Labor, if you remember, right? And everyone said, "Oh, it's the end of the Liberal Party." But by the time they threw Rudd out 6 years later, every state had gone back Liberal except South Australia, because people used to hedge their bets. They'd go one way federally and then one way at a state level. But the Liberal Party is in such a weak state in its state divisions. They aren't voting. They aren't getting in at a state government level either. And in WA they've got like 3 MPs or something. They'll probably have 3 MPs in South Australia, and so apart from Queensland, where they're going really well, that affects your ability as a party to organise, to have donors, to raise funds. It's a drag on you federally as well as the state level. So it's the point you make that their infrastructure is degrading, if you like. I've not seen them, well, no one's seen them in this weaker position, I would argue, since their foundation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you there. I mean, you've spoken about, it's not all on Susan Lee, obviously.
No.
She's got one of the hardest jobs of any opposition leader. She's not just an opposition leader, she's an opposition leader where, she's got to drag the vote up from the depths that it's plumbing at the moment. She's got a fractured, depths of hell. She's got a fractured party. But when it comes to the net zero debate, I always think if you're explaining, you're losing. And the Liberals have a lot to explain here as to what they're going to do unless they can get the focus on the government. I do feel like there's a few, chinks of light of opportunity for the opposition now, but it's just how they kind of capitalise that in the new year. And notably, Susan Lee's not going on leave.
No, she's going to be working a tail off all through summer. She's got to lift her numbers and the party's numbers over the summer to make sure that, to stave off any possible challenge in the new year. Laura sort of wrote today how Bill Shorten did that back in the summer of 2016 when Turnbull came in and turned the polls against Labor, and that's the sort of sensible thing to do. But it's a dreadfully difficult task, and. Net zero will work really well with certain constituencies, but it's going to work not very well in the ones that they've already lost, and they're the sort of ones they need to get back. I think there's a lot going wrong for the government at the moment. The inflation's back on the march. Energy prices are just terrible. I think we're hitting a tipping point now with energy prices in the public, and there is a view in the coalition that if they can sort of pull it all together, then a lot of the heavy lifting will be done for them because, voter anger will kick in. So you've got to be there as a credible alternative. It's, you've got to do more than politics and just point out the problem. You've got to offer solutions as well. So that's the sort of task ahead for the Libs. I just think, this time last year, Laura, we thought it was going to be a hung parliament, and that Anthony Albanese would be gone by Christmas, right? So I think we always got to be careful about casting too far ahead about how things are going to transpire. This time next year could be a totally different set of circumstances, depending on what happens to the economy and cost of living. The government thought we were through the cost of living crisis. It was going to start abating when inflation started coming down. They'd started doing some things like turning off power price discounts and lifting the deeming rate for pensioners, and now suddenly inflation's back above the band again. So it could be a pretty volatile summer. I'm going to be most curious about the state of the polls when we all start doing that again in February.
Yeah, me too. The polls aren't great. I just would like to point out, and you and I always talk about this, that One Nation often polls really high, but that's never translated at any election.
Yeah, it's at this stage, it's a protest vote. People have got cheesed off with the Liberal Party predominantly because that's where the vote's coming from. So they get an email or whatever from a pollster, and they're parking their vote with One Nation. And you're right; it doesn't necessarily mean they'll vote that way come the next election, but it does have the effect of changing behaviour, and we're seeing that with the Liberals and the Nationals responding directly to One Nation with both the net zero and the migration policy, which I think we'll see next week.
Yeah, it's not being ignored, and nor should it. Phil, great to talk to you. Appreciate it.
Good on you. Good on you, mate. Bye.